morning. We're going to start. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 190-152, 190-153, 190-154, and resolution number 190-164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolutions.
Bill number 190-152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190-153, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190-154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190-164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal year 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. Today we will hear testimony from the following city departments: Finance Department, City Treasurer, Sinking Fund Commission, Board of Pension and Retirement. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify from the administration is?
Rob Dubow.
Good morning.
Good morning, Council President.
Drum roll.
Members of Council, my name is Rob Dubow. I'm here to testify on the Department of Finance's FY20 proposed operating budget. With me is the first Deputy Finance Director, Kat Lamb. The overall budget amounts $1.8 billion, $15.8 million of which is for the Office of the Director of Finance direct expenditures. You have a written copy of my testimony, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Good. Man, I am so impressed. Got a couple of quick questions. As you know, last year, the school district returned to city, or more formally known as local control, following the implementation of a new local school board. Given this new shift in control, our credit rating agencies have listed the school district financial solvency as a potential risk to the city's credit rating. So do you think credit rating agencies will view the newer relationship between the city and school district over the long run, given Philadelphia's new local control of the school district, in addition to their continued need for additional school funding? I think in the earlier testimony there was a question about the city's $5 billion budget, and we have raised some concerns about that, but in large part that's because of our continued increase in contributions to the school district. And second part of that question, does it make any sense to combine the borrowing power of the city and the school district? So if you give me the first one.
So for the first part, I think what the credit agencies want to take a step back. Credit agencies understand the importance of having a fiscally stable school district that's providing the outcomes that we all want. So I think what they would want to see is that happening within the context of our maintaining our fund balances and our solid fiscal condition. I think that's really what they would want to see. I think it's important for them, though, that the borrowing for each entity stays separate. I think that's when they would really start to get concerned if we tried to combine the borrowing capacity of the two.
Okay. And we talk about the borrowing power again.
So I think that would raise some concerns for the rating agencies if we tried to combine the two credits.
All right, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. All right. Let's talk about our infamous Federal Reserve. So our 5-year plan includes a significant reserve projection over the life of the plan, including $92 million for the rainy day fund, $286 million for federal cuts, and an ending general fund balance in FY24 of over $153 million. things that I guess we should be, as the fiscal control people here, we should be a little excited. But if the city's projected expenditures and revenue are in line with the 5-year plan, the city will enter the FY24 with significant reserves at a level that will potentially exceed the city's internal fund balance reserve policy. Could you speak more to me on what you believe the appropriate allocation distribution between the federal funding reserve, the rainy day fund, and the general fund balance should be?
So I'm going to take that in two kind of separate chunks. One, to talk about the fund balance and the budget stabilization reserve fund. I think those two together should be in the 6 to 8% range to give us an appropriate cushion against if there's an economic downturn, if things go worse than we expect, we need to have a cushion. The budget stabilization reserve fund, I think, is important because there's still uncertainty about what might happen in Washington and Harrisburg. So having that kind of cushion above our target 6 to 8%, I think, is important.
What do you think is going to happen in Washington?
I think there's still a chance that there could be cuts that would have a negative impact on us. And we've seen the president within the last few months take executive action to move funds for a border wall.
But that's money that's already appropriated to other departments. That's not going to, I mean, the border wall funding was federal money.
That's right. So
for defense, it wasn't, I don't think we had any of that money allocated for the city.
No, we didn't. So that time it didn't wind up hurting us, but there's always a risk that something will happen that could hurt us.
Yeah, but I understand the risk initially when a certain party had control of all 3 branches. That's not the case now. Are we concerned that the Democrats wouldn't position themselves as a stopgap in terms of some dramatic cuts?
I think there's still a risk that there are things the president can do on his own.
What's PICA's position on that? Or what do you anticipate PICA's position to be on that?
I think PICA views that reserve fund as something positive. I think they're happy that that's there.
You think so?
Yes.
You think this year's PICA analysis will be supportive of the continuation of the Federal Reserve Fund?
I think so.
You think so? All right. So the next question, should we adopt a formal policy of moving unspent reserves into the rainy day fund?
So I think there are 2 different kind of positives. One, for fund balance, so you have a little more flexibility than you have with money that goes into the budget stabilization reserve fund.
Right.
So I don't think you'd want all of that money to fall to the budget stabilization reserve fund because then you're limiting your flexibility.
Right. Okay. Wage tax. We slowed down the reduction. Has there been any thought given our relatively healthy fund balances of looking at possibly moving that back to the earlier, I guess 2 fiscal years ago, wage tax reduction rate?
Yeah, so we have not had those conversations, and we still think that our fund balances are lower than where we want them to be, particularly in some of the out years of the plan. We get below 100 million in one of those years, so we had not really had those conversations.
But that fund balance, I mean, all due respect, I think it should include the Federal Reserve Fund. I mean, I know you like to categorize it in a different way,
right? But
that's the basis for having a $5 billion budget, as
well,
you said earlier. So that, far as from my perspective,
right,
that's a fund balance.
Even with that fund balance, we're still way below where the GFOA thinks we should be. And they say we should have 2 months worth of reserve, which would be like 16%. And we never get anywhere close to that.
Okay. And one last question this round. So in the budget, we include a $1.35 million increase to the Community College of Philadelphia. How do you think that reflects on the possibility of reaching a settlement?
I think it doesn't include the potential that a settlement would have some additional costs.
So there could, if there's a settlement reached, would it essentially be a shortfall in this?
I think we'd have to,
in the budget,
we'd have to have
or will we
conversation.
entertain some additional revenue?
We'd have to have conversations about
the,
what that means.
Okay. All right. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Good morning.
There was a recent article about Philadelphia opening up its checkbook and making all of its expenditures known. I think it covered FY2017, but not 18. Why not? And
I'm on. So, Kat Lamb, First Deputy. It's just the process to actually make that data available is pretty laborious. So we're in the process of doing that process for fiscal 18. It was just that we had started the process with 17 data and had anticipated it would take us less time than it actually did. So that's why we started with fiscal 17, but we're in the process of releasing fiscal 18 as well.
second tier to that is under risk management and payouts. Do you have a list of departments that have made settlements on different liabilities, exposures, payments?
We can get you something that breaks that out.
Does any department in particular jump out at you?
Let's get you that information. We'll get you something in writing on how that breaks out and what departments may be higher.
So, okay, so we can't find that now? We can't, somebody back there doesn't have that?
I'd rather actually kind of make sure we get it right and give you solid information.
Okay. So, for example, the police department, do we know for different payouts by way of liability? What generally is that? Is that a larger department?
Probably, but I want to make sure I got you there.
So I'm going to keep getting that answer if I keep asking?
Yes.
Okay. So when do you think you'll be able to formulate an answer to that?
That shouldn't take long. I mean, we should be able to get that back to you relatively quickly.
Okay. By way of capital expenditures, how are we doing on bridges and the infrastructure stuff by way of above ground, not sewers, but by way of bridges that go across neighborhoods? How is that?
Hold on, that document I have with me.
All right, I'll take it. We have a significant backlog in bridges repair. I always remember the 41st Street Bridge in the 3rd District took 10 years to fix. And as we look at, most of those bridges are over 100 years old. North Philly, West Philly, South Philly, Northeast. Those bridges that we crossed on our way to New York some of them are imminently dangerous. And I wanted to know what the cooperation level was from the federal to the state to us on how we're repairing them.
Oh, how they're working together?
No, not just that. How are we doing for our responsibility? And then when it comes to CSX and others, how we're cooperating to find out a capital plan by year of what we're going to see fixed. Yeah. South Street Bridge took considerable amount of time. 41st Street Bridge took 10 years. I just want to, in my lifetime, know which ones to cross and which ones to avoid.
Right. So I can give you the dollar amounts, and then we can have streets give you kind of a schedule of what bridges are going to be done. So we have, in FY20, we show a total of $200 million for bridges, and of that, about 2.8 or so is from us, and then there's matching funds from the federal government. Yeah, and over the life of the plan, then that gets up to about $350 million total. About $14 million comes from GO-backed borrowings, and we can get you a schedule of what that looks like.
In particular, on that, timetables provided to district council members in particular as to when these bridges are going to be repaired. The one that jumps in my mind is the 59th Street Bridge in my district, which is due to, and if you have specifics on that one, that would be helpful, because the more advance notice you give us, the more we can prepare the respective communities to know about the disruption. Overbrook, Winfield, Overbrook Farms are all going to be impacted by that one bridge closure in one way or another. Diversion of traffic, disruption of buses and mass transit. So it's the kind of thing we would like to get ahead of.
Right. So we will get you information. The 59th Street Bridge. We'll get you information on time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Morning.
I have a couple of questions. On the departmental summary by fund, this thick package that I read through, I have a few questions on that. I know you love that. But if you go to page 4, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this.
Yep.
Page 4 at the bottom, it says in fiscal 18, the actual obligations were 1.694 billion.
Yep.
1.694 billion. And then it shows in 2020 it's 2.3 billion. It's a 37% increase over 4 years. And I know a lot of it probably is this advances and other miscellaneous and contributions. Could you just explain those so we're clear on what that is?
Yeah, so part of that is we include contingencies for if we get grants. Sometimes it's spent and sometimes it's not, but we need to have appropriations in case grants come in.
Because that's a huge increase in 4 years.
Yeah, but it's not. So if you go to page 77,
Okay.
you can see up there in the grants revenue fund, 220 million.
Yeah.
That is a contingency for if grants come in.
So
if they don't, then that's not spent. That's not general fund money. That's not taxpayer supported money.
So that's not a guarantee every year. It's
It
hit
is
or
not.
miss.
That's right.
Because in 18 looks like we got 0, and in 19 looks like we got 250 million.
That's the original appropriation. The estimated obligations actually 0 in there.
Okay. And then just a quick commentary. You know, I've said that it feels like the budget went up $855 million in 4 years. How much of that was attributed to the school district?
So over 100 million is school district, and another, I think 130 is pensions. So just those two together are about 230 million.
About 25% of the increase.
Yeah, and then the budget stabilization reserve fund and the contingency for federal cuts is about another 100 million. And other benefits went up about another 100 million. So those items account for most of that increase.
So I think part of the concerns I have is that the budget went up $855 million, or 21% in 4 years. And to my recollection, I don't know another 4-year period in the history where we've seen that level of increase in our budget.
So I think there have probably been other periods where there have been high percentage increases. So
not of the dollar figure of $855 million.
Right, because dollars today are worth a different amount from what they were worth 20 years ago.
Right. But if we're looking out the next 4 years, we're not going to be looking at another $800 million over the next 4 years, are we?
So if you look in the 5-year plan, which I don't have with me. I can look here. So you actually, by FY24, more like at 5.4 billion in the 5-year plan.
What would the total be in
5.4 billion roughly.
So 400 million over the next 4 years versus 855 over the last 4. And then the other concern I have, and I think we're hearing this from the residents, because I think in the last 4 years the inflation rate was like 5.25% in total. But when you look at the increase in, for example, real estate taxes across the board in the last as a total of our collections at least, we went up 21%, which is probably just over 5% a year, 5.25%. And I think people are feeling those increases. And I think in retrospect, if we had been going along at 1-2% a year instead of this big push last year or so of 10 or 11%, we wouldn't have this outcry.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, one of the things that you pointed out when you first got here is that our values were under-assessed.
Correct.
And I think we're catching up, but you're right. And that's part of the reason that working with council and council suggestion, we've put in relief programs, like the UPA program to help people who are having trouble paying.
And do you think on the realty transfer tax that in the last 4 years, you've actually collected 32% more, which has been a big increase? Do you think that's going to continue?
So we show that over the plan slowing down, not that kind of rate of increase.
Right, because there's going to be a slowdown in 2020. Probably.
Yeah, and that's built in.
Okay. Let me go to some, are we doing on time? Am I okay on time? Okay. So I want to make sure, I want to ask some questions just so I have gained knowledge on this. So I need to learn more. But I understand that there are 2 financial reports that the federal government requires from any city that receives federal funds. The Schedule of Financial Assistance, also known as CFA.
Yep.
And the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR.
Right.
On page 163 of the fiscal year CAFR, under the single audit, it says we are not...
Which fiscal year? Sorry.
Fiscal year 18.
Yeah.
Under the CAFR, under the single audit, it says we are not in compliance with the Uniform Guidance Section 200-5.12 because these financial reports haven't been submitted on time. It goes on to say that this non-compliance could affect future funding. Should we be concerned about this as a city?
So we have been working closely. It's something between us and the controller's office, and we've been working closely with them to speed up our schedule and so that we can make those deadlines. It's obviously something that we had some concern about, or we wouldn't have put it in the document, but it's a problem that we're aware of and we're addressing.
And so, but right now we're not in compliance.
We're not, but we're working towards getting in compliance.
And so what exactly is keeping us from getting into compliance? What is the issue?
I think it's essentially a workload issue, and we're trying to kind of figure out the best way to address that.
Is there anything that you need from us in appropriations for more people or whatever to get this in compliance?
I don't think so, but if we do, we'll let you know.
And then why was the fiscal year C for the Schedule of Financial Assistance not submitted until December 31, 2018, 9 months after the deadline?
It's the same. It's the issue we were just talking about. It's the same issue.
Okay. I'll yield to my colleagues and come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Welcome. Morning.
Good morning, administration.
Morning.
Right. On page 2 of your testimony, you state, and I quote, that they would thank you, that work with the Mayor's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Managing Director's Office, the Department of Commerce to promote, I quote, equitable practices and inclusive policies throughout the city's grant seeking and grant management practices. So speak, if you will, to what those new equitable practices may be and inclusive policies that will guide the grant seeking and grant management process in this new year.
I'm going to ask Ashley Del Bianco, our Chief Grants Officer, to talk you through that.
Okay.
Good morning, Ashley Del Bianco, Chief Grants Officer for the city.
What is your name again?
Ashley Del Bianco.
Okay. How long have you been with the city?
8 years.
And how long in this capacity?
4 years.
Okay. All right then. Okay. If you could please speak to what types of, quote, equitable practices and inclusive policies will be used to guide the grant seeking and grant management process, and how does this differ from where the administration was 4 years ago?
I'll answer that in 2 categories. So we have 2 types of grants that we pursue. One type is competitive grants that are discretionary dollars that come from the federal government under existing appropriations, but in which administration has the ability to designate particular grant opportunities. And those are competitive. We have to apply against other municipalities or other applicants. In those cases, our ability to respond with equitable and diverse proposals, or including equitable and diverse proposals, is somewhat opportunistic because we're responding to a particular ask of the federal government. And in those cases, we do have a set of policies and procedures to try to look at opportunities to promote inclusion, equity, and diversity as we respond to those opportunities. We also have the opportunity to pursue other grants that are private philanthropic dollars, and in those cases, we often are able to make a case directly to a funder to look for ways to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, as stated in the testimony, there are opportunities that our office, we play a support role to various parts of the administration, various agencies, and what we do is we work with and advise them on how they might be able to do that.
So cite an example where you've been successful in making a case and the person, the funding entity bought your appeal.
Okay. One particular case of a grant initially 2 years ago was the Racial Equity Here opportunity. That was a private funder of philanthropy that was looking for opportunities to support the city government in promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion directly in city practices and policies. That grant opportunity we pursued in coordination with the Mayor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and other agencies within the city. And through that process, we received funding. We also received technical assistance so that the different agencies were able to offer training and development for staff.
So those dollars were used for training and development?
They were, and also for studies to look at some of the diversity and inclusion policies of the city.
Okay. So is that still in play, or are those dollars over?
That particular opportunity sunsetted, but we have pursued other subsequent opportunities, not just from that funder, but from other funders who are looking to support the ongoing work and implementation.
So as a result of that training, have you seen any difference in the yield of the training?
There have been examples of that. I could get you some more specific details on that, but it certainly has included data analysis on city policies that have then informed how the administration has shaped things. But I could provide some more specific detail.
That would be useful because training for training's sake is empty.
Yes.
We get the funding dollars, but if we don't use the data to indeed implement new practices, then it's just been a waste of your time and that funder's money.
Yes, we have grant reports that I can provide to your office.
That would be terrific. How soon can the president get that?
As soon as possible.
So is that today? Is that the end of the week?
I will go back today and find those grant reports.
Okay. Are there goals associated with this new focus on diversity and inclusion with respect to grants?
With respect to grants, in terms of how many grants we apply for that have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals?
Yes.
There is not a specific number, but it is a priority for us. We do seek opportunities, and we also try to, as I said, in those opportunistic situations where we're applying to a specific request for proposal, we try to build some of those practices and themes into the work.
And lastly, with the federal grants, I don't want to misstate or misquote what I think I heard, and that is that with regards to federal grants, they ask you to provide data or information on diversity and inclusion, or no?
On some occasions, yes. It really depends on the particular grant opportunity.
I see.
And the agency that we're applying to.
So you've been there for 4 years.
Yes.
Where do you see a change, a difference of where your department was when you got there and where you are now 48 months later?
Specifically related
Specifically to diversity and inclusion with regards to grants.
In terms of, I can't say that it's a metric that we are specifically able to track in a straight line because we're trying to be responsive and respond to the particular opportunities.
As they had come to you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but if I can provide some more information, I'll try to do so.
Our 5 minutes not up yet? Okay, I'll wait for the next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Morning.
This issue that I'm about to inquire about has already come up in some of our hearings this year, but I really want to drill down on it and to really get some answers on the record. You all know that my office has inquired about the use of city capital dollars on school district property. And for example, you know, we constantly hear, you know, the public and many others talk about the city being, you know, much more innovative in trying to use city dollars to leverage private investment and or charitable investment in our works. And in my district, for example, the Lindy Family Charitable Foundation has created a very smart, impactful, and a transformative way to make over our schoolyards. And many of them, if you drive through and you look at them or walk them the way I do, it's just an asphalt hardscape. It's just usually blacktop and or concrete with nothing there. Their program is called Fiesta Playgrounds, and it is beginning to be rolled out citywide. So they're just not making this investment in schools in the 9th Councilmatic District, but through their data, okay, looks like Councilman Jones may be a beneficiary too, right, across the city of Philadelphia. However, they could expand more quickly and have an even bigger impact if we could supplement their foundation funding with city capital dollars. Yet your office has told us, no, we cannot use city capital dollars on school district property. And just for me on the record, can you explain why that is the case, especially now that we have local control? Now, I understood, I think earlier, Council President Clark had asked a question about, does it make sense to combine the borrowing power of the city and the school district given local control? So while my question is not exactly the same, because we have local control now, tell me why we wouldn't or shouldn't be able to use our city capital dollars in this instance to match it with this foundation funding.
So I think it depends on the usage. I think there are cases where you can use city money for school district facilities if you show that there's, you know, a public purpose and that the facility will be available. So it's probably worth our talking about it in more depth to understand the situation.
Okay, all right, we will make sure that we do that, and for the record, you know, the public does use it, especially on the weekends, right? Our kids are in there and they're playing basketball and so forth. So we'll definitely follow up with you. This next question is somewhat related to my question about using the capital dollars on school district property. Help me to understand why we cannot use capital dollars for maintenance on items that we originally used capital dollars to purchase. So, for example, cameras and trash cans on our commercial quarters. I'm just trying to understand why we can't use capital dollars because we're trying to maintain our investment. Yeah. So how can, you know, we do that? So
you can use operating dollars on maintenance, but for capital dollars, you really want the investment to last at least 5 years and to be at least, I think it's $15,000. So for items that don't meet that criteria, you would want to use operating dollars.
So, for example, the first quarter that I ever worked on when I was elected, the first one was the Wadsworth Avenue commercial quarter. And every time I think about that length of years, the banners that we secured in 2005, right, are still standing strong, and some of the other streetscape improvements we made, so they have long outlived the 5-year, sort of 10-year requirements. And so much like we'll follow up on the issue relative to the schoolyards, I would like to sit down and figure out a way to hammer out a compromise on this issue.
Right, and it may just be that in the end it's best to fund it out of operating. So I'm not saying that we can't fund them, it's just a matter of finding the right source.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Real quick, the assessments became public yesterday, OPL. Assuming that those assessments continue as proposed, what will be the impact on the 5-year plan?
So not much at all. They're basically around what we had projected. We projected 3% growth.
Similar to what?
Yeah, they're a little higher, but after the appeal process, they may be the same. So really no impact on the 5-year plan.
So we don't anticipate any real. Okay. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President.
You're welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
Morning.
The requested amount for this year, not next year, that was $68 million. Is that correct?
Sorry, for what?
For the current year that we are in, not for the new year coming up, the new fiscal year, but it was $68 million. Roughly, I'm not saying to the penny, but 68 million?
I'm not sorry. You're talking about the finance department budget?
Yes, the finance budget.
Finance budget for FY
2018.
18.
Yes.
Okay, so let me get to the right page. So there's I think the amount was lower than that, but let me find the appropriate page. So the page you want to look at, sorry.
I could do it another way if it makes it easier.
Now, if you look at page 8, really you want to take out, for 18, there's that 44 million, but 30 million that is payment to other funds. And there's about 4.3 million that's contributions, indemnities, and taxes, which is really going to other places.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. You are correct. I said 18, I meant 19. So yeah, but
Okay.
starting with 18, the budget amount was 14,151,000 roughly, and then the actual amount was 44 million. But 30 million was for what?
That 30 million is payments to other funds, which so it was payments to capital. It moves over to capital.
So money was transferred to the finance department, and from there, it went to
For capital projects.
for capital projects. Okay.
And yeah.
Then in 19, it was 68 million was the budgeted amount, but 98 million was the actual amount.
And I see original appropriations of 78 on page 8, right? And the big difference there is the $20 million again in class 800, and that's the payment to the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund.
So I see that in general, since 2009, the finance department spends about 33% more than of the budget than it requests. On average, 33% more. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I'm trying to understand is that is that part of like a common practice that money is moved to the finance department to then pay for other things?
Yes. So throughout this budget, there are most of the payments that show in this budget are not for the operations of the Office of the Director of Finance.
Right.
So they're for benefits, they're for payments to the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund, they're for transfers over to capital. So they're for kind of a hodgepodge of things, but they're all showing up here.
Okay. So the budget that I kind of must deal with every year is always challenging because it seems to me, at least from my perspective, that it's not a very detailed budget, that money is put into certain places, which it appears based on past history, that there's no intention to actually spend it where it's being listed, and it will be transferred out later for its actual purpose. My problem with that, just speaking for myself, is how do I vote for a budget where I look at numbers, I don't know what they're for, they may be for something good, maybe there's something better. How do I vote for a budget where I don't believe that the money listed under a category is actually going to be spent within that category? I'm not saying you have an answer for that. I'm just saying, like, I'm challenged with that.
So a couple of things. One, on the detail for the kind of direct expenditures in finance, there are more than 50 pages that lay out the positions they'll go for, the contracts they'll go for. The things you're seeing that come in later, like the payment to capital, always come back to council. They're always transferred. So it's not like if there are additional funds we want to spend and that we don't come back to council. So there is transparency about all of it. So the items that you're saying are new are items that will happen if budget performance is better than we anticipated, but we always come back to council with those.
So if there is a department, and I've put up charts before where over the last 9 years, it typically gets, let's say, $1 million, and without any additional people, materials, resources, the budgeted amount is $12 million. I'm going to look at $11 million with great suspicion. I don't know what it's for, but what I'm saying is, even though you come back with a transfer ordinance, I don't know that money isn't better left in the pockets of the taxpayers. And therefore, for me, particularly as we have discussed earlier, I don't think that the budgeted amount based on these unreliable tax assessments, that this money should be collected by the city. It should be returned or credited, and therefore, what I really like to know is what is this money, all this money, intended to be used for that I'm not being told what it's for?
So it's intended to be used the way it's shown in the budget. We do, though, want departments to manage their budgets, and we'd rather that they come in slightly below rather than above. If they come in slightly below, then our budget performance is better than the initial budget, and then we would come back and ask to move it. But there's no guarantee that they will come in below. When we build the budgets based on what departments say they need.
Thank you very much, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman McGinn.
Good morning, I think, still.
Good morning.
So could you talk a little bit, I think we talked a little bit about this with the 5-year plan, but some of the impacts that recent things that have moved for around property taxes, how it relates to the stability of the school district finances?
Right. So there have been a couple of pieces of legislation designed to help property owners with the impact of the increase in assessments. So there's a trade-off that. I mean, there are obviously reasons you want to help people with their bills. When you do that, it then has an impact on the school district, either in the district having less revenue or having a delay in getting that revenue.
Yeah, so I'm aware that these things have an impact on the district. Have you calculated what the impact will be over the course of 5 years? And whether there need to be any adjustments made with the city's, with any other city funding?
So we did those calculations, I think, at the time the bills were heard and testified to them, so we can get that information back to you. But we also knew about those before we made this budget proposal. So, in terms of what we thought the appropriate amounts were to give to the district, the impact of those bills was already included.
Okay, wait, so do you think that is there any significant adjustment, in your opinion, for the school district's 5-year finances moving forward in order to assure us of the stability that City Council worked so hard for in last year's budget?
Yeah, I think the district made those adjustments in the plan that was presented to the school board last week. So I think they accounted for that.
In the lump sum budget.
Yes, and in their 5-year plan projections.
And are there things out of there that you would like to share? Because I don't know that many of our council colleagues here today have paid, we haven't gotten a briefing on the lump sum budget, for example, from the school district directly. So is there anything that you think we ought to know right now that came out of the lump sum budget presentation at the school district last week that we ought to know?
Yeah, so the lump sum showed balanced budgets through FY through 21, starts to go negative in 22, and then has some substantial deficits by the end. And I think the way the district framed that was to say that they really wanted to get 2 years of balance and have a plan that framed the conversation for their funders about, how we need to approach getting them to balance and ensuring that the investments they make can continue. And I think that's a conversation that we have to have with the state and kind of look at what happens with the state over the next couple of years.
Okay. So I know that the meetings between you and the school district and the parking authority have become more frequent and more data and information is being shared. I'm curious about what your strategy is to continue to increase their contributions. Obviously, as you know, when I came in 2016, they were projected to be at their lowest. It was something like $3 million under former Director Vince Fenerty. They're now at the highest point, but that's that's obviously separate from the fact of what their actual revenues have been. So do you have a sense of what your strategy is to improve or maximize the parking authority's contribution to the school system?
Yeah, and I think it's really a matter of working with them and the district to make sure that we're all focused on that, and that's kind of one of their goals, is to make sure that they run their finances in a way that maximizes that number.
Do you think that do you have confidence that they know how to run their finances?
I think that they have put a real focus on this, and I think the results have actually been somewhat positive in terms of that number being higher than it was originally projected to be.
So as a near $250 million entity that takes, takes in money for folks and is meant to be a public trust, again, they should have a focus on it. Do you have confidence that they understand what their financial what their financial projections are and how they plan to improve their finances to the public trust?
I do think they understand that.
Okay, and do you have confidence in them to continue on the way they are?
I think so long as we kind of keep working with them and are able to...
Do you have oversight over their budget?
No.
Would you like oversight over their budget? Do you think they could benefit from that?
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to questions from before. And on the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, can that be completed without the schedule of financial assistance to CFA?
Yes, they're two separate documents.
Can't be completed without it.
Yes.
But doesn't the CAFR contain vital information that comes from the CFA?
So they are interrelated, but the CAFR gets finished, audited before the CFA is finished.
And then the fiscal year 18 CFA hasn't been completed either. Is there any reason why?
And it's the same issue, and we're working to make sure that it comes out earlier than this year's did.
And is there a target date for the completion of that CFA?
I want to get back to you on that because I had a date in my mind, but I want to make sure that it's right.
And then did we put any corrective action plan in place for future to try to meet the federal requirements for next fiscal year for the CFA and the CAFR to make sure that we're...
Yeah, so Kat has been working with the controller's office on putting that together.
So, when I looked over the CAFR on page 163, it says single audit, the paragraph 3, it talks about that, I'm just going to read this one sentence. In the opinion of city officials, the only significant contingent liabilities related to matters of compliance are the timely filing of the city's audit report, data collection form, and reporting package detailed below, and unresolved and unquestioned costs in the city's schedule of financial assistance to be issued for the year ended June 30th, which accounted for $519.3 million for all open programs as of November 30th, 2018. Of this amount, of the $519 million, $427 million represents unresolved costs due to the inability to obtain audit reports from sub-recipients for the year ended June 30th, 2018. The remaining $92 million is city-funded general fund grants. So that $427 million, that's what we're talking about, that is not audited?
No, everything, sorry, read that again. It's not.
It says of this amount, $427.2 million represents unresolved costs due to the inability to obtain audit reports from sub-recipients for the year ended June 30th, 2018. This is page 163 in the CAFR.
Yeah, no, that's a separate issue on sub-recipients. But that, I think, is also being resolved.
So tell me what that is, Rob. What does that mean?
I need to get back to you with more detail on that one.
Okay. It just sounds like a lot of money not resolved.
Yeah, but yeah.
Is the city controller's office in compliance with the single audit requirement?
Well, it's kind of both of us together. It's the same issue that you're asking about.
And another question, why is the Health Choices Behavioral Health Fund audited by an independent auditor?
I'm not sure.
Is that about, you know how big that fund is?
Yeah, that's a big, I mean, that's...
Like $1 billion or so?
Right, yeah.
And we have a separate auditor for that. And do you think the city should have a cash management policy?
The city does have a cash management
do?
policy, yes.
So can you share that with us?
Yes.
Okay. In our current fund accounting structure, how many funds actually does the city have at this point? And do they match the bank accounts on the treasurer's side?
It's listed, and if you have the CAFR, they're all listed in there, and we can get you the list. There are, our cash accounts aren't lined up with just funds. Some funds can be commingled and others aren't, so no, they don't match up.
Okay. The Community Development Fund shows a $20 million appropriation that, according to the fiscal year 19 estimates that we've been provided, hasn't been spent.
That's like that $200 million. It's a contingency for if funds come in.
But there's another $20 million appropriation for this year.
That's right. In case, it's the same issue. In case grants come in during the year, we want to have that appropriation.
So is that $40 million or $20 million not spent?
No, so the 19 appropriation would lapse, right? And so it's a new appropriation.
Just carried over.
It's new.
New.
It lapses, it goes away.
So if we don't use it, we lose
Correct,
it?
on the operating side, if you don't use it.
So we lost that $20 million.
We didn't receive anything. We never got it.
But we could have received it?
It's a contingency in case we receive something.
Okay.
But if we don't receive it, it's not like we had money that we lost.
In fiscal year 19, the budget appropriated $250 million in grants funds, but was never obligated. I'm just curious as to why, and why wasn't this grant awarded?
So that again is what we talked about earlier. Those are contingencies in case grants come in.
Okay. Let me just ask you the overall question that still concerns me. I've asked it before, so I'm like repetitive. Budget's gone up 21% in 4 years. Deep poverty's gone up 12 to 14% in the last 4 years. I think we went, according to your information, from 186,000 to about 215,000 people in deep poverty. What are we forecasting for deep poverty over the next 4 years?
So I don't have specific projections for deep poverty, but I will tell you that you're linking two things that are important to link, because one of the reasons that our expenditures are going up is we're making investments in things that will help with deep poverty. And because deep poverty is something that developed over decades, it's not going to go away in 1 year. But we're investing in schools, we're investing in pre-K, we're investing in things to tackle the opioid crisis. There are a number of investments in here that are all designed to tackle that in the long term. And it's like when we talk about pensions, it's not something that you deal with in 1 year. So to look at deep poverty in 2 years and say, well, it's gone up, so these investments aren't working, I don't think that's the way it works. I think you have to take a longer term view.
Right. And I'm all for the education and the rebuild. I have no issues. I'm supportive. But I think we need to do more for the people that are like age 20 or 19 that don't have jobs, up to age 50 or 55 that are unemployed and aren't trained for this economy. I think there's several legs of poverty, and I think that's a big leg that we're really not addressing as aggressively as we can. I know that my colleague, Councilman Parker, has the Power Up program, but we need to do way more on that stuff than what we're doing.
And one of the investments we have is in workforce development, and I think that gets at what you're talking about. But Power Up is a great program that definitely helps with the issue.
I guess what I'd like to see in my last question, I'll be done, is that tackle this in a big way. If we wanted to get 50,000 people off the books of being in poverty, what do we have to do? What are those strategies and tactics to aggressively go after cutting the poverty by 50,000 in the next 4 years? I'd be willing to work whatever time it takes to work on that, but we need a plan of action to accomplish that goal.
Right, and I think that's what you see throughout the plan. I mean, this plan is really dedicated to looking at those issues.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes, good afternoon. I want to punctuate Councilman Dom's point about what more we can do and should do with those on the opposite end of the continuum. And so I need, while we know Power Up matters, is making a difference, is the idea proposed by Councilman Dom a part of the continuing discussions that the administration is having as we tackle this elephant called deep poverty?
Yeah, it's always our focus. So we're always talking about ways to get at poverty and deep poverty. So
no,
yes.
I'm not questioning that. Don't misunderstand me. I'm talking specifically about those citizens on the opposite end of the continuum whom too often we don't make a part of our strategic thinking.
Yes, they are a part of our thinking.
I would say, so cite examples, and separate from Power Up, where the mission is achieved in a 2,000% way. Power Up, and what else might the administration be
right,
thinking?
So if you look at something like funding for pre-K, right, so that helps kids get a head start on their education, prepares them better for school.
Rob DeBoe,
It also,
we're clear about the front end of the continuum, because we know if we're going to pay for it one way or the other. We're going to pay for it on the front end, or we're going to pay for it on the back end. So for those young people that we miss on the front end, who end up being handicapped, disenfranchised on the back end, 18 to 24, what are we doing for that contingency of young people?
Right, so you're talking about people who are past the school age.
Yes.
Got it. So that's where we have investments in things like workforce development to help people prepare for jobs. But I'm probably not the best person to give you all the details of that, so we should probably get back to you with details.
So who in administration would be better suited to address those questions?
So it's probably, on the workforce development, it's probably Sheila Ireland.
Sheila Ireland?
Yeah, that's her area.
Okay.
But we can definitely get you something on that.
Please?
Yep.
When?
I would want to check with her before I commit to her timeline, but we will get something
Is
as
she a
quickly
part
as
of
we
the
can.
administration?
She is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where is she, in Commerce?
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, she's in Commerce.
Okay, please remember to do that, because
Yes.
this notion of creating, or at least focusing on young people 18 to 21, sometimes 18 to 30, 18 to 50. I'm curious to know how the administration is tackling those individuals, because, you know, if they contribute to the tax base, then we move that needle.
Understood.
Okay. Page 9 of your testimony, quote, to mitigate against the risk of future state and federal funding cuts, the plan includes an annual federal funding reserve of about $55 million. While this reserve would help offset potential cuts, it represents only a small fraction of what the city projects receive in grants from the state and the feds. So how has the reserve for federal and state funding grants funding cuts grown in the past 5 years? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that reserve level has been fairly stable over the years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it hasn't moved much.
You say fairly stable.
I think it may have been in the low 50s, and now it's 55.
Okay, all right. Where have we seen more cuts, at the state level or at the federal level? I'm just curious, because knowing how that impacts.
I think over time we've seen more at the federal level.
Okay, I wonder why. Okay. Let me go back to my sticking point on diversity and inclusion. And so I'm unclear on where the thread happens with regards to the grant seeking and grant management piece and the impact that those grants are having on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the Department of Commerce. So when the Department of Commerce comes before us, I will look to see some thread that connects the work of the grants office and the work of the Department of Commerce, because that's completely went over my head with regards to the answers yielded by the professional who spoke about that. Where's the thread that connects the grant seeking and grant management to the Department of Commerce?
In many cases, the Department of Commerce is an applicant for grants, so officially the grants office ourselves, we are not the applicant. We consult and support a city agency or office in applying.
Okay.
Could you clarify perhaps your question about the thread?
My curiosity is, you receive the dollars, but where is the work of those dollars manifested in the Department of Commerce? I'm missing it.
There may be specific grants that are for specific projects related to work that the Department of Commerce plans to implement. And in the cases where specific dollars are won under a grant, we've proposed the city has proposed a scope of work and must fulfill that scope of work in order to receive and use those dollars.
So where is the diversity and inclusion factor in what you just described?
If there are diversity and inclusion factors written into or proposed as part of the grant, then they would be required as part of the scope of work.
Okay, all right then, thank you. That clarifies that.
Okay.
That completes my questioning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to follow up on the issue that was raised a little earlier regarding the city's credit rating. And I just want to also just note, I remember there was a time when the city of Philadelphia was in no way, shape, or form prepared for a black swan effect of any kind. And so, one, we thank the administration for placing a very strong focus on how we would function, particularly in the case of any federal crisis that could potentially come our way in the next few years. But I wanted to just note for the record that almost exactly a year ago, I think it was March 23rd, 2018, S&P cut its credit rating on Philadelphia's general obligation bonds to A from A+, and it cited concerns about our pension liability, uncertainty about revenue support for the school district, and then those potential federal policy changes. However, on a positive note, in November 2018, Moody's upgraded its outlook on the city's general obligation credit from negative to stable. Very specifically, can you tell us what does this mean for our borrowing costs, and specifically, how is it going to impact our operating budget and that debt service line item in particular?
Yeah, so often your bonds trade on your weakest rating.
The weakest rating.
Yeah, so if the weakest rating changes, then it has more of an impact. That being said, it's always a good thing when something like a negative watch comes off. It's, you know, it makes it easier to tell the story of your bonds. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing. It helps reduce our costs in the long term.
In the long term. So while we were excited about Moody's upgrade, it ultimately doesn't usurp all of the...
Right, but when a rating agency puts you on negative watch,
yeah,
two things can happen. One, they can say, okay, things have gotten better, we're taking you off, or they can downgrade you, and that would have been a real hit, and then our costs would have gone up. So it's very good that it went that way.
In addition to that, and I know we're going to talk about it, go back, if you will, to give me the explanation about the need to maintain the fund balance compared to the rainy day fund. And I'll tell you why. We've had legislation proffered, in this body, and I've had to communicate recently, this past Saturday, at a budget briefing and town hall meeting with members of the public, sort of not really, or I'm not going to say not grasping, I just think some things have been miscommunicated that weren't accurate about, with all of the challenges that the city faces in a number of areas, why is there a need to maintain such a healthy fund balance and the rainy day sort of fund? I mean, and just explain that for the record, please.
Right. So the Government Finance Officers Association, which is kind of the leading authority on local government finances, thinks you should have a fund balance that's equal to 2 months of expenditures, so almost about 17%. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of jurisdictions that get up there. We decided that for us, that's not realistic because of all the needs we have, and that if we tried to get to a balance that high, we'd be making other sacrifices. So we set a policy internally of being between 6 and 8%.
6 and 8.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we tried to get. Last year we were actually end of the year at 8.1%. Mm-hmm. So we got there. There's a difference, asked by the difference between a budget stabilization reserve fund and our fund balance. The budget stabilization, the reserve fund, has certain restrictions on when money can come out, so it's not as flexible. Fund balance is more flexible. So when you look at the trade-off between the two, you want to keep in mind how much flexibility you want to have. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you need to make sure there's a healthy amount in your fund balance and that there's some in the rainy day fund.
Because you have had such a long history, and I say this in as complimentary a manner as possible. You've been here through multiple administrations, Rob, and your institutional knowledge about the city's finances is very well respected across the board. What is your response to a person who says, we have a rainy day right now, and they start talking about all of the issues that are facing the city, and why shouldn't we be spending those dollars in other areas right now? Right. And I really want you to reflect back on when you worked in different administrations that did not have or didn't have dollars in the rainy day fund.
So I think the best example, which I think is where you're trying to lead me, is during the Great Recession. Right. So we actually had a fund balance then of over $200 million. But when that downturn hit, immediately hit our revenues. It eventually hit our pension contribution because of what happened with earnings. So our fund balances went negative. We got to the point where we were worried that we couldn't even run out of cash. So we had to make dramatic cuts. That's really what you're trying to protect against with your rainy day fund, is having to make those dramatic cuts when the economy goes south and goes south more quickly than you anticipated.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ginn?
Thank you. So I'm interested in in the area of risk management, and notice that there's been a significant increase in settlements that were projected for fiscal year 2019, and then to maintain it, it's almost a 50% increase. And these are, I assume, settlements related to civil actions brought forth against the city.
You talking about indemnities? Which,
risk management?
Yeah, but there are a number of things that
it
you're
says settlement costs for closed claims.
Got it. Okay.
A 50% increase from 2018 actual to 2019 target.
Yeah.
So one, can you provide a list of settlements over 15,000 in the last year categorized by department?
Yep. Yes.
And then two, is there a reason that you're projecting such a significant increase in the settlement costs? And are you looking at these claims by category, and is there something that we can do, or are you providing recommendations to either city departments or more broadly, so that we can reduce the city's exposure to liability?
I'm going to ask our risk manager to address that.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Barry Scott, Deputy Director of Finance for Risk Management. Yes, Councilwoman, Risk works with departments to address issues which are repetitive in order to try to control those costs. Our Safety and Loss Prevention Unit looks and works with our claims unit in order to try to resolve these issues as much as possible. So it is something that we are looking at.
So is there a reason you're projecting a 50% increase in settlement costs for actions against this, for settlements related to civil actions against the city?
So we've changed a little bit how we are approaching some of these matters, and what we're able to do in a number of cases is to resolve these matters before they become litigated. Risk only handles pre-litigation claims. And so and what we're trying to do now is target matters which we believe it's best to resolve the claim before it goes into litigation. And so we have been picking up some matters which would otherwise have gone to litigation, because what we find is that, and sorry I don't have the numbers, but that in fact those matters which go to litigation are settle or resolve at a much higher value. And so when we can resolve them in risk, we can save the city substantial dollars over the ultimate costs if they were resolved as litigated matters.
I think it goes back to the request earlier then, that it would help to understand like whether you're categorizing, whether these claims are being categorized in any way, like what areas that they're happening, and whether there's a concurrent level of discussion or dialogue within particular departments, so that we can avoid settlement or litigation would be the most ideal situation. I think we can both agree.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we can look at that and get that something for you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask a little bit about CAMA and its unrolling. Also a little bit about One Philly. I know the rollout of One Philly has not been all that smooth. So as we look at One Philly's rollout and then we're thinking about CAMA, what are you seeing as things that we as a city ought to be under consideration so we're not caught off guard by, say, overtime costs or, can be helpful in terms of the rollout period?
So they're actually kind of very different projects.
Yeah,
so One Philly was about payroll and benefits, and CAMA is about the assessment process. But I do think there have been lessons from One Philly about making sure, that we communicate early and often, we communicate effectively, that we do the change management thoroughly throughout the process. And I think that will translate to all of our projects.
Can you talk a little bit about CAMA? We assume that it's on track, and can you talk a little bit about what you think it can ideally achieve and what we can see both in the finances but also in sort of engagement or projections going forward? Yeah,
so CAMA is still on track, still on the same schedule, start to go live in about a year. Okay. And it will make the
So January 2020 or July 2020?
Yeah.
Okay.
January. It will make the assessment process much smoother. It will make the communication between the various agencies involved much smoother. It'll make the process more efficient. It'll make it much easier for us to do the kind of reporting that everybody, including us, wants us to be able to do. So there are a number of benefits from CAMA.
Okay. I think that's it for right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Excuse me. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you mentioned that the $220 million in grants revenue funds is for grants that the city might or might not receive.
Right.
But it looks like in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19, there were no obligations associated with the grants revenue advances. However, in the mid-year appropriations for fiscal year 18, we took $94 million from grants revenue and distributed to departments mostly for unbudgeted payroll expenses. And in fiscal year 19, we appropriated $127 million from grants revenue, again, mostly for unbudgeted payroll expenses. Were these appropriations associated with the grants that we received?
No, those appropriations in those cases were mostly related to collective bargaining agreements and really wound up coming out of our fund balance. Is kind of the net impact of those.
So the $94 million in 18 and the $127 million in 19 were from the labor negotiations?
Well, you talked about the Class 100 portion of it. Yes, that's primarily what they were for.
Okay, and the other piece I wanted to just bring up, I know that Councilwoman Parker was a big proponent, and I want to mention this Power Up program again. We had a hearing on it a while ago where...
Sorry, the what?
Power Up.
Power Up, yeah.
Community college. And we had a hearing that said that the program is going to produce for the city like a 13% return in our investment per year for the next 10 years. And we're investing $800,000. This is to help people, I guess, advance their business and open business. Why wouldn't we dramatically increase that program, considering its return and considering the need of especially people that are, 18 to 50 who need this opportunity?
I'm assuming it's probably a capacity issue, but we can look into it.
I mean, because there's an avenue where we can maybe do better and dramatically change people's lives. The other piece I don't want the administration to lose sight of is that we have the highest poverty, some of the highest taxes, and the lowest entrepreneurship rates of the top 20 cities. And when you look at the breakdown of businesses owned in the city, 78.6% are owned by white people, 10% are owned by Asian, and 2.4% are African American. So my question is, what are we doing to create entrepreneurship programs like Power Up and others, but how do we dramatically change that equation? Because 41% of our population is African American, and yet 2.4% of the businesses are owned by African Americans. How do we teach people about entrepreneurship? You know, this body put in a resolution asking the state to provide mandatory entrepreneurship courses, 7th to 12th grade in high school. We'll see what the state does with that. But what else can we do to advance that cause?
Probably a better question for Commerce.
Commerce? Yeah. Okay. After I said all that, you can send me Commerce. Okay. One other question on the credit rating. I want to compliment the Finance Department because I noticed that our interest payments actually went down, if I'm correct, in 4 years, from $795 million down to $656 million. That's positive. We dropped our interest payments $139 million. I'm assuming it's because maybe we managed our portfolio better and refinanced and have some lower rates.
Yep, that is definitely part of it.
Because the flip side is, 4 years ago, we had $7.25 billion of debt, and now we have $8.6 billion of debt. So we've increased our debt almost 20%, but we've dropped our payments dramatically. Is that pretty accurate?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'm sure.
And so over the next 4 years, are we anticipating to continue to increase the debt load?
So there are, and this is kind of the age-old trade-off we have, right? We have an old infrastructure that needs investment. So, you know, you'll see in the capital program, for example, you know, one of the things we have in there is $200 million for paving, which I think everyone agrees is desperately needed. So there will be debt associated with that. And, you know, there's debt associated with the rebuild program. So there will continue to be borrowings over time because there are infrastructure needs.
All these increases, though, we're seeing in the budget of 21%, the debt load of 20%, even though the interest rates went down, don't you think against an inflation backdrop of the same period of 5.25%, it puts an undue burden on those who can least afford it?
So I think that a great deal of those expenditures are dedicated to the people you're talking about. If you look at the programs that we're implementing, that's what they're dedicated to handle.
Okay. I think I'm done with my questions for today. Okay. Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. We have no further questions here, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time here today. Our next office is the Treasurer. I can say good morning because it's 11:59, so good morning.
So I'll say that quickly so I can say good morning as well. Good morning.
We have your written testimony. So
Rashia Johnson, I would just be quick. Good morning. I'm Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer. Joining me today is Raymond Hill, Deputy Treasurer for Banking and Investment, as well as Matthew Bowman, Executive Director of the Sinking Fund. I'm pleased to provide my testimony on the City Treasurer's Office for fiscal year 2020 operating budget. You have my written testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions on.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's learning this now. Just, you know, very quickly, go to questions. Okay. Ms. Johnson, there was a lot of talk last year about the whole reconciliation of the bank accounts. Mm-hmm. And I've seen you've come obviously way, way down from about 40 million to about 500,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you just briefly kind of go into how that was all done, and do you feel confident that now those procedures can, you know, stay in place to keep the figures more in line, if you will?
Yes. So currently we are fully reconciled and current on all of the accounts that the City Treasurer's Office is responsible for, and it's about approximately 77 accounts that we're responsible for. We have processes in place to making sure that all the accounts are assigned to an accountant. They have backup when they're out. There's cross-training, and we also are in the process of putting internal controls and procedures in place in the Treasurer's office to make sure that what happened historically that we inherited but took care of never happens again.
Okay, thank you. And I know you, I think there's a monthly update to City Council on that?
Yes.
And, okay. And you include the information on that of those procedures, so Council kind of knows what's going on with that? And, yeah.
The procedures are not finalized, but
Okay.
we can share the finalized procedures once they're completed, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Just one more question for me. The Federal Reserve, yeah, as you know, been raising interest rates consistently over the past 2 years. And how does that policy impact our floating rate bonds or swaps? Or does it?
So right now, floating rate debt SIFMA that is not one-for-one with the Fed raising interest rates, but we've seen a small uptick, but we've also been monitoring our variable rate debt, which is a small component of our outstanding debt, to see where we could actually fix out some of our variable rate debt with no additional cost to the city versus carrying the variable rate debt.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Johnson. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First, I want to say that I'm pleased that we accounted for most of the money. We're down to a very small amount of the 33. And the 7 accounts that were not reconciled, which was one of my bigger concerns also, I think through the reconciliation task force, we're down to like 99 or almost 100% of all accounts reconciled?
All the accounts are reconciled.
All of them are reconciled,
Yes.
Great. And so then I have some other questions. In the consolidated cash account, roughly, how much goes through that account on a monthly basis?
That is on the consolidated cash account. Monthly activity is about 1.3 billion, just in and out, moving throughout that account.
Okay. And currently, do all funds go into the consolidated cash account, all receipts and everything?
Or receipts related to the city itself, yes, but of course, like airport and water.
Right, separate.
Are separate, yes.
And any idea how many bank accounts we use to hold that consolidated cash account?
Do we have that? The number of bank accounts for our consolidated cash, it's approximately 4, but let me just get the exact number of those accounts.
And one of the reasons why I asked that is because that's such a big account in the city. Mm-hmm. And I know that in the prior reconciliations, I think there was, if I recall, there were 3 years, like from 14 to 17, a lot of it before your time, that was not reconciled in that account. And I want to make sure that we're on top of that. That's a big account.
So there's some small one-off accounts, but there's one main account, but they are all reconciled and continue to be reconciled.
And so I'm going to just share the numbers that I saw that I didn't really want to share last year, which concerned me. And that was that this account had 1.3 billion going in, and if it wasn't reconciled for 36 months, not you, but the department was behind 46 billion. You had 1.3 billion a year times 12 months in a year times 3 years was 46 billion behind just this one account. That's why I want to make sure we have a lot of focus on it.
Yep, so since the time when we have put a plan in place, and the plan is currently working, where we've added additional staff that have responsibility with the consolidated cash account. We do, as we receive the receipts, we do daily reconciliations, and we have someone specifically assigned to that with backup, as well as we have one person that's responsible for doing the larger monthly reconciliation with backup as well, with an accounting manager, as well as the deputy for banking and investment that supervises the entire process.
Okay. And by the way, I commend you and the department and the, was it the Reconciliation Task Force, I think that was called? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, when you added up all the accounts and multiplied it by the months not reconciled, we had 113 billion, which was a monumental task to reconcile, 113 billion. That was over a 7-year period, some of the accounts. Yep. But, I mean, the general disbursement account was 43 billion not reconciled. So after a while, it became like real money. But I'm glad it got resolved. That's the main thing, and you guys did a good job, so I just want to put that on the record. Thank you. Do we commingle, well, let me ask this question. Do these bank accounts match up with how funds are managed in Famous to make it easier to reconcile?
So, not exactly. So the way, it doesn't line up one for one with the fund as well as the accounts.
Is there any way to fix that?
As we're looking to get a new system and working closely with the accounting department, central accounting, I'm sure we can streamline it as best as possible.
That would make it easier, though, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah. And do we commingle any funds, like grants funds? Are they held in separate accounts?
What, I'm sorry?
Do we commingle any funds, and are grant funds held in separate bank accounts?
All of our grants are deposited into the consolidated cash account.
So we don't hold them, the grants in separate escrow accounts?
Only in times where they are required. Some grants have special specifications, and we would do that, but because of the amount of accounts that we have and we have to monitor, mostly grants go into our consolidated cash account.
And do you feel, as our treasurer, that you have enough staff currently to handle the obligations and duties of your department?
Currently, yes. I'm in a position right now of hiring one additional body per the report that the outside accounting put together to be the liaison between the Treasury and the accounting. And so I think that will fully complement the Treasury staff at that point.
How long does it take you to hire somebody right now?
Sometimes it can be a several-month process.
Several months.
Yes.
Do people wait to hear from you? I mean, if I was applying for a job and you told me several months, I'd be going somewhere else.
We've been lucky that the candidates that we thought would be the best fit were available.
Okay. In your testimony on page 4, it shows that in fiscal year 18, there's an amount of $6.3 million in contracts. And it's almost $4 million higher than fiscal year 17. And I was just wondering what that would be for. So fiscal year 17, it shows roughly just over 2, and then fiscal year 18, it goes to 6.3 million. It's a $4 million increase. Do you know what that would be for?
You said on page 4. Let me just.
Yeah, it's in contracts.
Okay. So, our contracts increase, one, based upon the volume of transactions we have with bonds, as well as we had an additional one-time contract with the outside accounting firm.
Was that for the reconciliation?
That's correct.
But that was like 500,000.
That's correct.
This is like 4 million.
So again, when we account for in our contracts our bond deals. The more bond deals we do in a year, the more money that has gone out.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Before we go to the other council people, I'm going to make a suggestion if nobody has an objection. Since the sinking fund is represented here, they're next. Why don't you give any testimony you have? Just put something on the record. Then if there's questions for either or, they can be asked at the same time. Okay? Sir, please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon. Matthew Bowman, Executive Director of the Sinking Fund Commission. The sinking fund budget for 2020 is proposed a general fund of $296.7 million, which is just an increase of $1.67 million compared to fiscal year 2019. And the all funds budget totals $656.65 million, which is actually a decrease of approximately $22 million from 2019. And with that, I'd be happy to take any additional questions.
Great. Thank you. Let me go to Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to state for the record, and just have a few questions, but I just want to put on the record the work that our city treasurer has done over the years in helping the city of Philadelphia. Even prior to coming to this current position, when you were in the private sector and the city was going through a process of trying to sell PGW, but it's at that point we still need to bring in new money into Philadelphia Gas Works. You had suggested a commercial paper program. That was something that was beneficial for PGW. We could not go to market because we were in a process of the previous administration trying to sell PGW, so markets were somewhat closed. So you recommended to the city to use a commercial paper program that was beneficial for the city and allowing us to provide resources for PGW at that time. In addition, that concept was also borrowed by the airport because the airport was in the process of trying to do a capacity expansion project, and they also could not go to the market in the type of ways they would normally do for bond offerings. And so the airport also borrowed that commercial paper program idea. And so it was that type of creative ideas that you brought to the city even before you coming into city treasurer. Then in your early term as city treasurer, you noticed the reconciliation issues, which from my observation came from a lack of resources. Over the years, many administrations have been able to balance budgets by not hiring people. And so early in your term as city treasurer, you noticed these reconciliation issues were a concern and brought that to the attention of the administration. From there became additional media coverage, and I know that you had spent a lot of time working on that issue in spite of the fact you were also going through a pregnancy at the time. So I just wanted to put that on the record and thank you for the work that you've done in that regard. Also, some people in this body know I've been working on the issue of public banking for the past couple of years, working with your office in that regard, and I want to thank you for that perspective. We're now moving to a selection process with a committee that's a diverse committee from people in different perspectives and backgrounds to select a consultant to help us evaluate and study the feasibility of public banking in the city of Philadelphia and how we can move forward in that regard. I just have a few quick questions I want to ask you. On page 3 of your testimony, you talked about debt management and how the office will manage new and outstanding city debt. Can you give me some numbers in reference to the refunding for GO for spring of 2019, summer 2019, which is new money, revenue bonds, general obligation, as well as the water and wastewater revenue bonds, and the paid new money, and then, well, hopefully we won't need a TRAN, but we always do need a TRAN. But if you could give me on those first 4, the GO refunding and also the new money, those amounts.
So the par amounts of the transactions?
Yes,
okay.
roughly, the range.
Okay, so the GO refunding is approximately $190 million. The new money GO bonds is approximately 356. Water, wastewater, is that 250? Yeah, the water new money is approximately 250 to 300. Haven't finalized that yet. And then the paid, and that's not new money, that's actually a refunding for savings. And okay. That is approximately 180 million. 180 million,
okay. And then also I see you're going to be doing a RFP for, I guess that's an FA for water?
That's correct.
And then also an FA for GO and also bond counsel for the TRAN. But I just have one other question I had in reference to on page 9 of your budget testimony, the contracting experience. I see various firms, but one firm somewhat not as familiar with, Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, which was used as disclosure counsel for GO.
Yes.
What's that background of that firm? Because that's a firm I'm not as familiar with.
Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, we use them for disclosure counsel here in the city. They have also co-disclosure counsel, but the particular person is one of the experts that help write the regs with regards to disclosure. So we thought he would be, Hawkins would be, John McNally would be the best one to help to assist the city in crafting our disclosures.
Okay. And where are they based out of?
Washington, D.C.
D.C., okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Taubenberger, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. And thank you for being available to myself and my staff over the year, and that's appreciated greatly. I was going to ask you and comment on the reconciliation is now seems to be working very, very well. I think the way it looks to me, you've done a super job here. There is 500,000 that are unreconciled at this point. How does that stand with other cities? Is that better than most, or are we about average, or?
Well, one, there's always transaction in flux, so a lot of it is timing.
Okay.
So talking with other cities, there's always going to be a time where you have some variance,
Correct.
but we are working to see if we can, chop away at that. But there's always going to be a little variance from month to month because of timing and when transactions go in and out of the bank and when the bank closes their cut off their statements.
But other major cities would have the same situation.
Yes.
And we'd be about, I guess, average or maybe a little better, or?
I'm hoping that we're average.
Okay.
Or a
that's
little
good.
better, yes.
Well, I know you have it's hard work what you do. You had said sometimes it takes several months to hire someone.
Yes.
And why do you think is the holdup? Is that because you need to do a little more investigation, if is the right person, or is what if it takes several months to hire? Like Councilman Dom said, they may go away, but is there a holdup on our end that we could help you with?
Sometimes it depends on, sometimes the process can go a little bit faster on the exempt side because there's a little bit more flexibility, but then also for an example, with our accountings, you have to make sure that the lists are available and the lists are current to pull someone off one of the civil service lists, so sometimes that can take some time.
Okay. And the last question I have, essentially, is there anything we can do in the city council with rules and regulations and such that we're empowered with to help your job become easier? Something this is a dialogue as far as I'm concerned. I want to hear what's on your mind. How can we help you, become better?
I think working closely with council as we have over this, has been helpful and will continue to be helpful to mitigate any roadblocks. But I think right now we are moving in the right direction with regards to making the policies and procedures and having them standardized for the Treasurer's Office.
Excellent. That's good to know. I thank you very much, and thank you for a good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. See, I have around 12 questions. No, I'm just playing. All right, we're good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to do pensions next. Good morning. Good afternoon, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Council President, members of Council. It's nice to be here again. Normally, I would dispense with the testimony, but I'd like to read a brief summary because we did have a lot of changes this past year, and just kind of give the board a summary, the council summary. To my left is CIO Christopher DeFusco. My name is Francis Bielli, Executive Director. To my right is Deputy Executive Director Shamika Talaferro, and our executive staff behind us, and the Finance Director, of course, Mr. DeBow. So the plan's funding percentage increased from 45.3% to 46.8% as of July 1st, 2018. That's a 1.5% increase. Important factors contributing to the increased funding percentage are the recent changes and the decision to dedicate the additional funds to paying down the unfunded actuarial liability, resulting in slashing the UAL by 2.1% in fiscal year 19. As part of the strategy to strengthen the fund, any additional pension contributions resulting from the last round of collective bargaining negotiations, along with the proceeds the pension fund receives from the sales tax, are held in a separate notional account as part of the adopted revenue recognition policy. The funds in the RRP notional account are dedicated or mandated to paying down the unfunded actuarial liability. The annual city pension contribution is now based on the higher RRP, not the lower minimum municipal obligation mandated by state law. Accordingly, the dedicated stream of RRP money will result in a continued accelerated paydown of the UAL. It should also be noted that approximately 81% of that unfunded liability is from Plan 67, a plan which no new employee has entered since 1987 for exempts and non-reps, 1988 for police and fire, and 1992 for DC 33 and 47. As the RRP continues to pay down the UAL at an accelerated pace, the effect of the Plan 67 legacy liability should continue to decrease. The improvements to the fund also resulted in a positive annual cash flow for the fund for the first time in my memory. The gradual and continued reduction of the assumed rate of return, the adoption of the revenue recognition policy, and other responsible steps explored and adopted by all parts of our government interested in the health of the fund reduces the fund's risk profile and will continue to benefit the members of the fund and the taxpayers. The desire to adopt strategies to further strengthen the fund among the board, city administration, municipal unions, and city council resulted in the adoption and formalization of a plan for new non-uniform municipal employees. Plan 16 is a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan. An employee in Plan 16 receives the traditional Plan Y defined pension benefit up to $65,000 in annual pensionable earnings, with the opportunity to make additional contributions for earnings above $65,000 into a 457 plan, including a partial city match. While new uniformed employees are not members of Plan 16, new employees pay an additional 2.5% towards their base pension contribution, while existing uniformed employees pay an additional 1.84% to their baseline rate. All employees, including uniformed employees, are required to make additional employee pension contributions as part of the new tiered contribution tables. Tiered contributions require employees to make contributions above their base contribution rate based on a sliding salary scale. The additional contribution sliding scale begins for those making $45,001 at 0.5% and culminates at 2.75% for those making above $100,000. Additional tiered contributions for those in Plan 16 are capped at 1.5%, which is the rate associated with their $65,000 defined benefit cap. The board voted again to reduce the assumed rate of return to 7.660 for the current fiscal year and 7.55% for the following fiscal year. The board has reduced the assumed rate of return for 10 consecutive years, a total of 120 basis points or 1.20% over the past 11 years. Per the board's actuary, while the funding ratio may appear to reflect lack of progress in funding, the decrease in the assumed rate of return represents improvement of the fund's risk profile, improving the likelihood of achieving the assumed rate in the future. Based on the most recent actuarial analysis, the fund is projected to reach 80% funding by 2029, one full year ahead of previous actuarial projections, and 100% funding by 2033. The fund's investment return for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018 was 9.01%, net of fees. You may also recall that the fund's portfolio was restructured in fiscal 2016 to divest from all but one hedge fund and other underperforming high-cost investment products. Accordingly, there has been a drastic reduction in investment fees paid by the board from $33.5 million, which is a ratio of 0.69 in fiscal year 14, to $15.7 million, an investment ratio of 0.31 in FY18, an overall 55.1% reduction during that time frame. The board and the staff continues to monitor fees and ensure the fund is operating efficiently in a cost-effective manner. Passively managed investments now account for approximately 52% of the fund's assets, up from roughly 29% just 4 years ago. Using our investment manager database, the board once again conducted a utilization study to determine the universe of diverse investment managers that meet the fund's criteria, which is having a 3-year track record and at least $100 million in assets under management. The results are that 9.5% of firms and 5.2% of their products had greater than 50% minority or women ownership. Through February 29, 2019, the fund's current lineup of investment managers includes 22.10% diversity managers, far surpassing the universe that the utilization study revealed. Diverse plus local managers are approximately 30% of the fund. The board continues to seek high-quality, diverse, local, and emerging managers for allocations across all asset classes. Board members and staff continue to participate in the Middle Atlantic Plan Sponsor, the National Association of Security Professionals, and other nonprofit organizations that are proponents of diversity in the investment professional ranks. The board is an active member of an association called the 30% Coalition, which is an organization committed to the goal of increasing women participation on corporate boards. The board supports proxy initiatives promoting issues such as inclusive corporate boards, equal pay, and other important social issues. The board also encourages our investment managers to create and/or expand diversity outreach through internships, mentoring, and hiring programs. The board is seeing real results by investment firms in this area as a result of our efforts. Our investment staff participates in local financial education program for high school students called Invest in Girls, and another school-based financial education program called Operation Hope. The mission of Operation Hope is to expand economic opportunity in underserved communities through financial literacy, dignity, and empowerment. Topics include basics of budgeting, banking, fundamentals of credit, and introduction to savings and investment. By all accounts, the program is very successful and well received. As a staff, we also periodically are asked to be panel members or guest lecturers at various industry education conferences and at local colleges, including graduate classes at Temple University and the University of Pennsylvania. The board is the recipient of a certificate of transparency from the National Conference of Public Employees Retirement Systems in furtherance of our level of public disclosure. A large percentage of our employees continue to use the deferred compensation program to enhance their retirement savings. There are currently 23,281 employees participating in the 457 plan administered by Nationwide. Starting this month, actually starting yesterday, employees have greater flexibility in bolstering their retirement savings by participating in a Roth 457, which allows after-tax contributions to the 457 plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Bielli, are you reading something other than the testimony that's provided to us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's why I wanted to read it, so you'd have it in addition to the testimony.
All right. Was there a reason you just didn't give it to us?
These were all just recent additions, so I'll be glad to send it to you.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Can you just give us?
Yeah, so we just got the actuarial report, the draft last week, and the Roth 457 just went through last week. So these are all new additions. And I'll be glad to send you electronic copies.
Yeah, can you just give us a copy?
Yes.
And we can summarize so we can get to questions.
And the last thing is, so the Roth 457, people can participate after tax money to the 457 plan. So it's not tax deferred. They can get it tax-free when they draw it out of retirement. In addition, people can set a percentage for that. So whenever they get a raise, it automatically goes up to that percentage for their deferred compensation.
No. Okay, no, we appreciate the additional.
A lot of changes
Hopefully,
this year.
yeah, in the future, you can get it to us beforehand so we can formulate our questions based on
I'm glad to
this
hand
wealth
this
of
up right now. You
knowledge
can have
that
this.
relates to your testimony.
Sure.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
You got it.
Thank you.
No, you can have it.
We got a couple of questions, kind of three-parter. So this fiscal year, seems like good news, we're projecting to be a net cash flow positive, which means, I'm assuming it means money coming in is equivalent to money going out in layperson's terms. And earnings will, and additional revenue will be based on earnings, so that's obviously a good thing. And if you can talk about that as it relates to our unfunded pension liability, how exactly that plays into that. Part of that question is if you can tell me how the trajectory of our fund compares to comparable pension plans in comparable cities, municipalities, and also how have the changes to the pensions investment strategy helped with long-term stability? Because we'd like to hear some good news if you can give that to us.
Okay, and I think compared to other public pension funds, I don't have their projections. I wouldn't have that.
Pull the mic down a little bit.
I wouldn't have their projections, so I wouldn't know what their projections are. However, I can tell you that for a couple periods of time, for example, for the past year, we outperformed CSRS, Bucks County, Chester County, Delaware County, and Montgomery County.
Okay.
If you want to go out to a further 5-year period, go out to 10 years, we outperform CSRS, PSERS, and other public pension funds. So our returns have been good compared to other public pension funds.
Sure.
Concerning the projections, the positive cash flow is a result of that dedicated stream of money for the additional contributions, the sales tax, and the tiered contributions being mandated to pay down that unfunded actuarial liability. You may remember that during the proposed sale of PGW and during other proposals, buyouts of pensions, so on and so forth, the idea behind the proposals was to get a lump sum of money to try to pay down the unfunded actuarial liability. The idea of the revenue recognition policy was formalized, except for DC 33, was formalized into all of the collective bargaining agreements. So that's not a policy mandate that can go away very easily now.
Right.
It's subject to collective bargaining. And I think the unions and the city and city council are all happy with that because paying down 2.1% of the unfunded actuarial liability in this past fiscal year, remember, only included DC 33 fully and police under the new contract. Next fiscal year, it will include exempts, non-reps, DC 47, and fire department employees. So the compounding or exponential effect will be that much more dramatic as paying down the unfunded actuarial liability. So the work that the unions and council administration did in order to effectuate that change will have a very good positive effect. As far as the cash flow.
Real quick, on the sales tax, you mentioned that. I know there was some controversy around the sales tax. I know my good friend and colleague, locally now, but formerly up in the state, when there was an issue about the sales tax, and we had anticipated being able to have all that sales tax revenue going to pensions to pay down the unfunded liability much quicker. And the formula that was worked out was to save schools, and we obviously had to do that, but a little disappointed. But the contribution from the sales tax is increasing as projected.
It is increasing
in the original plan.
And we do have the actuary. Again, this is a draft report, so we should get in the final one soon.
Okay.
Does have projections going out to 2038, and that will be in the actuarial report when it's finalized. So they are projected to increase going forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And by the way, we do appreciate the council president's efforts on that behalf, as I tell Mr. Stitt all the time, on behalf of the pension fund and Councilwoman Parker for
Yeah,
that sales tax.
it's a collective effort by all of us and our employees for agreeing to a more robust contribution to a plan, and municipal workers were really, really great, you know. I'm sorry, I interrupted
The
you.
negative
You had
cash
one
flow,
last
that's
thing.
okay. As far as the negative cash flow, and again, this will be in the actuarial report, this was in the draft report. The cash flow has been negative for, well, ever since I can remember. It's never been positive, but the last 3 years, 4 years, it's been trending upwards because of the additional contributions being made by the city, because of the collective bargaining changes that were made. We were a mature pension plan long before many other pension plans were, and we made changes to adapt to that. Some other pension plans may not have made that changes. So what we're seeing is an evening out of us and other pension plans, and I think we are seeing a more positive cash flow. We are seeing more stability in our pension plan than other pension plans. For example, if you look at some comparable cities and the total contribution ratio to benefits, ours is the highest of any of these cities I'll give you. Ours is at 95%. And I wish I brought my glasses, so it's tough to read. But I'm going to have Chris assist me. So Baltimore is at 65%, Chicago 66%, 50% for Houston, and 68% for Pittsburgh. So what that means is that our fund is very stable. We are almost a pay-as-you-go sort of system, which means if we have a down investment year, it won't be as big of a hit on the general fund as some of these other comparable cities that aren't contributing as high a percentage.
Right.
In fact, you may or may not see a report coming out in the next month or so by Pew applauding the stability of our pension fund in a study that they're doing. So
Okay.
I think we're seeing a lot of positive things happening with the pension fund and the culmination of efforts over the last 4 to 5 years.
All right, that's good news. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you. And Mr. President, out of anybody in this room, only you really know, heartfelt, when this pension board comes before us and we hear about their recent successes that we know have been sort of growing and compounding over the years because of their sound management. You know why I smile, because we made some very tough decisions under your leadership here as president of this council and during my tenure in Harrisburg as chair of the Philadelphia delegation. And I just want you, Fran, and your entire team to know that when Philadelphia gets it wrong, when we get it wrong, it is highlighted in every newspaper. It's on every news station. Everyone, everywhere highlights what happens when Philadelphia gets it wrong. But when you are able to sit there and for the record note that our pension fund here in our city of Philadelphia has outperformed CSRS and PSERS in Montgomery County and many of the regions surrounding us, and I don't ever remember reading maybe but one article or one line about that. Tell me, if you will, and I'm going back to some questions from last year. I want you to know that we are proud that you outperformed them, but when you think about why, what do you attribute it to relative to your management? Is it the continued reduction in the assumed rate of return? Is it because we've gotten out of some of those more expensive investments, and away from hedge funds? I don't know. Tell us, what do you think is the secret to our sauce? How are we outperforming these others?
Yeah, and I'll let Chris DeFusco also answer some of the specifics of that. But yes, it's all of those things. But getting out of the high-cost, low-performing investments was a key turning point for us. We did that back in 2016 when Michael Donatucci came to the fund, and he helped redo our asset allocation along with our consultants. We did that, and we've kept that plan in place. Chris has kept that plan in place. The board has kept that plan in place. And what it did was not make us an outlier. Prior to that, we operated, I would say, more as an endowment as opposed to a public pension fund. And the high fee investments that we were in not only weren't returning well, but they were costing us a lot of money. So reducing our fees by over 55% was key. But also, the equity markets clearly have helped. I mean, the equity markets have done very well, and our fixed income has done well for us also. So yes, I think it's been a combination of the lower fees, more judicious investment decisions, part of those lower fees going to more passive investment at the percentage of 52% at this point versus the percent previously.
You'd say a 52% passive managed.
That's correct.
Okay, so that means it's going down. We were at 57%. Well, we had 50%, 7% last year.
Yes, it's slightly lower than last year. Part of that also is because our active managers have outperformed very well, so that percentage goes up. It's not necessarily because we have chosen more active managers to hire versus the passive managers.
Tell me, if you will, how many, because although we're doing well, we've outperformed PSERS and SERS and a lot of the regions in our area, but we still have that $6 billion of unfunded liability. Tell me what the actual number is now and walk through it, if you will, because it is so frustrating when I hear people talk about our unfunded liability and they don't know the other half of the story, Mr. President. And I think you summarized it well. I just want you to walk back through it for the record, that it's attributed to legacy costs associated with 67, and who's still in 67?
Yeah, so the unfunded, 81% of that unfunded actuarial liability is due to people who have not been in those plans from 1992 backwards to 1987. On a positive note, many of the recipients of those pensions are still living, right? So that's a good thing. However, it's not good for the pension fund, right? For the pension fund, the longer people live, and that's also part of our funding percentage. We increase the mortality rate. We update that every 3 years at a minimum when the experience study comes out. So as people are living longer, that assumption changes. So that has an impact on the funding percentage, just like reducing the assumed rate of return does. But yes, there's approximately, I'm going to say, 1,500 to 1,700 active employees that are still in Plan 67. So, we still have those people that are active, but the pay down of that unfunded actuarial liability through the RRP will start to have a very cumulative effect on that unfunded actuarial liability. But if you look at the funding percentages of the plans under Plan 87, they're very high. The police and fire are funded at in the mid 80% ranges, low to mid 80% ranges. Even the municipal plan under Plan 87 is funded in the high 60s, close to 70%. That's not even to mention Plan 10, which is at over 90%, and Plan 16, which is projected to have no funding issues because of the type of benefit. So again, it's that legacy. It's that legacy issue, the unfunded actuarial liability, that is the main driving force behind that $6 billion.
Well, I'll tell you, I think you all have done a yeoman's job in management, and I welcome any revenue-generating ideas that anyone has that can specifically tackle the legacy costs associated with Plan 67, because when we sort of think of the 300-pound gorilla in the room, that is it for us. But that unfunded liability sometimes overshadows even the greatest successes that we've had in recent years. With that being said, I also want you to tell me, if you will, how many of our employees are actively contributing to Plan 457, and you mentioned the Roth IRA as well. How many are participating?
So the Roth IRA just started yesterday. Okay. So there actually have been people who've already signed up for it, and it actually went live over the weekend. So people are signing up for that. I don't have those numbers yet. I won't have those for a while. I can get back to you on the numbers of how many people are contributing to Plan 10. However, in the 457 materials, they do mark that as a separate, it's called a 401A account.
401A.
So whenever the employee contributes, we call it a 457 just here. But when an employee makes their own contributions and the employer matches it, it's under 401A. So the assets are growing, and there are more and more people participating in that. In order to ensure that people either in Plan 10 or Plan 16 understand the importance of contributing and enhancing the defined benefit that they have, Nationwide and staff does seminars multiple days a week. Nationwide goes out to the smallest of departments where there might be 5 or 6 people at a remote location, to the airport. They hold luncheons at the Municipal Services Building. They are always out there trying to stress the importance of making your own contributions to enhance the defined benefit as part of that, Plan 16 or Plan 10.
Well, Mr. President, my final question, and thank you for your leeway and comment, is that one of the toughest jobs in this city, and I think for municipalities across the nation, is balancing the retirement security of its workers along with the fiscal health of the city. And I want you, if you will, you commented briefly, but when you think about the plans that were just negotiated via collective bargaining, I'm referring to the stacked hybrid, assuring a defined benefit to, the 60, did we get to 60, Mr. President? I'm so happy we got to 60, Mr. President. So tell me, if you will, how does Philadelphia compare to your knowledge when you think about, again, that delicate balance of the city's fiscal health along with the retirement security of its workforce?
I think it's improving greatly compared to other cities. I think, more importantly, this city is going in the right direction. This city has made changes, even dating back to when Plan 10 was initiated. We were maybe one of the first jurisdictions in the country to have a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan. We are definitely one of the first jurisdictions to have a stacked hybrid plan. People told us it wasn't possible. People in other states, people in other jurisdictions said it wasn't possible. I think that started when Charday was still here, even before Matt. So that started a while. That's been in the works for a while. And let me just give you the projections for the MMO. If the city just made the MMO projection versus the current revenue recognition policy. The actuary projected this, so by 2029 under the MMO, we would have been 76.7% funded. Under the RRP, we're projected to be 83.5% funded. By 2033, under the MMO, we would have been 89.9% funded. Under the RRP, 102.9% funded. The differences between the two are dramatic. Now, whether you get to 102% or not get to 102%, there are variables in that, such as investment return, and I think everyone gets that. However, assuming all things are equal with the assumed rate of return, which is now 7.55, that's a roughly 13% difference in funding percentage just because of the collective bargaining changes and the sales tax provisions. That's exactly what this is. It's nothing else. And so that's the effect that those changes have had, and it's a very positive, forward-looking effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If you could please allow the professionals on each side of you to ID who they are, what they do, and the team of professionals you brought in the back, because you came in here with a major.
Well, you know why we did that? Because I don't do all the work. We don't do all. We have a good staff who does all the work, and many of which are not here. But so we have Administrator Stacy White sitting here. Next to Stacy is Shahid Lloyd, who runs a unit where people purchase time and get their letters when they're new employees. Dave Fagan, Administrative Assistant. Okay. We have the Reverend Tyrone Jordan in the back, who's in our investment staff. Is that Dominique? Yeah, Dominique Cherry right there. We have Bern Buckley, Deputy CIO, Kristen Baer, and Abdel, both from our investment staff, Bill Rubin, who's our Director of Audit, and Jim Kasanis, who is our Chief Compliance Officer.
Okay, and the two to your left and right?
Oh, Christopher DeFusco, our Chief Investment Officer, and Shamika Talaferro, she's the Deputy Executive Director.
Okay then, thank you very, very much. My questioning is focused on the song that I sing for all departments whenever you come before me, MBE, WBE participation. And thank you for the great improvement in our fiscal status as has been articulated by Councilwoman Parker. On page 3 of your testimony, you state that in FY18, for professional services contracts, $3.6 million of the 13.9 went towards MWDSBEs. And based on my calculation, that's 26% of the firms. So is that to your satisfaction? Is that, well, here it says, for example, in FY18, 30% of all manager fees went to MWDSBE firms. So are you where you want to be, or provide background?
No, so we are, and those numbers, always our investment fees are on a little bit of a lag, so we're getting them in on a rolling basis. So FY18 is still actually being finalized. It's very strange in the investment world. It takes a while for real estate funds, closed-end real estate funds, private equity funds. It takes them a while to get the actual market return into us.
Very well.
So for FY18, it's actually, the participation fees were almost $5 million, 4.9.
Okay then, that's
and
a big difference.
That was out of roughly 17, so it's about 28.10%.
Okay, that's a huge difference, huge difference. And now, the MBE, WBE numbers for public works, services, supplies, and equipment is 25%. However, the participation rate for professional services is 26%. Why?
Well, the professional services are more of our investment managers.
Okay.
And they are, again, they're zero-sum contracts when they're initiated, and we don't know what the amount is until the numbers actually come in, because they're based on a percentage of the assets under management.
And you spoke to in your testimony how you have tackled the issue of diversity and the demographics of your managers. Too often, we hear from departments answers that are not accepted. So why don't you share with us how you all have been intentional in making sure that that mix of managers is diverse?
Our board is not shy,
as
as Matt will attest to. So when we bring in an investment manager, even an existing investment manager, one of the questions we always ask them is, tell us about your diversity, but not just strictly your staff diversity. We want to know about the investment professionals.
Thank you.
And also, we want to know what programs you have in place in order to recruit diverse investment professional candidates. I won't use the name of the firm, but we have a local firm that invests with us, and they actually started a program, brought in interns, and actually hired someone full-time within the 9-month period that we asked them about. They didn't have an existing program until they got to the pension board. And because of our questioning, they started a program, they instituted an intern program with local universities, including Channing University, and they brought in interns, and they actually hired someone who was born and raised in North Philadelphia, is an investment professional now working with that firm. So it's very, very important to us, very, very important to the board, and we have seen real results doing that.
Well, that's a great story, and that speaks to how you have to be intentional and strategic, because often it won't happen organically. So tell that story to some of your colleagues across government, that it's possible when it's intentional.
And, well, no, thank you. And Chris and Dominique have spoken at various seminars throughout the country and talked about the program that we have, and other pension funds, other cities, other states are shocked that we have
That it's doable.
such a good, and it is doable, and it's, otherwise you will get lip service, and we're not interested in that.
Amen to that. My last and final question speaks to, my staff and I make it our business to look to see how professionals are being paid across the board, all wrapped up in this term called pay equity. And I want to quote this properly. As of November 2018, there were 56 full-time staffers at the board. Of the 56 full-time staffers, 37 are minority individuals and 19 are non-minorities. So why is it that an average minority full-time staffer salary appears, based on the numbers that we've looked at, is $20,000 less than their non-minority counterparts? And why do we ask that question? Because there's an ask for $559,000 increase in the budget. And so help us understand the need for that and why those dollars, or maybe those dollars may go towards pay equity.
So the first part of the question I will answer is, if you exclude me from the salary, I think that 20,000 disappears.
Oh.
So I blame the board for that, because that's what they pay me. No, I blame, if you exclude my salary, it's public information.
Okay.
I think my salary skews the results. I think also, for the additional money, is there was a lot of changes in, as far as collective bargaining and increases, and that has to do with it. As far as the overall budget, when we submitted the budget also, the cost for one Philly was, we budgeted that, but then when the cost came in at a later point, it was a little higher than we thought.
Very well.
So,
Well, thank you for that explanation. And so maybe the lesson for us as we look at these docs and actually ask for the information, maybe we should include a line that removes the salary of the lead professional for that office, because it does tilt and tilt the numbers.
it does skew it.
Okay. All right then. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
I have a few questions, not many. It looks like from 2018 to 2020, there's an increase from 56 to 73 positions, 32% increase. According to section 16, page 5, it says budgeted positions for 2020, 73.
So when I came to the board, I think there were budgeted at 79 positions. We've never increased it. We've reduced it. That could have been on a different, I don't know where that number is coming from, but it's been in that low 70s range since I've been there, since I've adjusted.
The page is page 5 of section 16 of the budget, the fiscal 2020 operating budget, and it shows that in 18, there were 56 full-time people, and in 2020, where the request is 73.
So, yeah, even last year, there was 55 out of 73. So,
Yeah, last year you're showing, you still had budgeted 73, but I don't know if you filled those positions.
we filled, I think when you asked this question last year, we said we had a couple vacancies that we were waiting to fill. We did fill those 2 vacancies. So yeah, now it's 56 out of 73 instead of, I think it was 54 last year.
So you have 56 filled right now.
That's right.
So you don't need the 73 budgeted.
Is that a trick question?
Yeah.
So, no, it's, I think as I alluded to last year, I think there's a right size of employees. I don't think it's 56. I think it may be slightly higher than that. I can't be sure yet, but it's not 73.
Okay, that's no problem. And then the other question I have is when you look at the, see, that also skews the whole budget, because when you go back to page 3 of section 16, your personal services in the budget are increasing 13.5% in 2 years. And what I'm not clear on, why the employee benefits in 2 years went from $4,089,000 to almost $5 million, a 24% increase.
Right. So when we submitted the budget last year, we submitted a ratio that turned out to be a little bit less than the benefits, the fringe benefits. actually called for. So that was right sized this year as a percentage, slightly over 1%. Last year, I think we put 0.92, so it skewed the amount, and that's why we went slightly over budget last year. First time ever that we went over budget, and that was because of a percentage that we used that was not correct.
But if we were looking at your budget and said basically, okay, we'll say 60 positions, that would change a lot of these numbers, I think, to a degree.
Oh, sure. With 13
Okay.
positions would have a big effect.
Let me ask you just general questions. There's 66,000 people right now, I think, in the pension program?
Yes, roughly 66, that's right.
66. And is there 29,000 employees?
Slightly under 29, that's right.
And roughly 37,000 currently receiving payments?
That's right.
And I know my colleague, Councilwoman Parker, talked about the underfunded liability. Is it still $6 billion, or is it less than $6 billion?
Right around $6 billion, that's right.
$6 billion. And then in the fund right now, how much are we investing? Is it 4.5 to $5 billion? What is that number?
So we're investing all but a certain percent, and Chris could talk about that.
So, as of the end of February, which is when we have the most, the official report that's on the website, we had just over $5 billion in the fund. Invested, with the exception of we do keep a certain amount of cash in reserve. So we had about 1.2% in cash at the end of February. All the rest of the $5 billion in change is actively invested.
So would you say, just broad strokes, that 3.8 billion is invested and 1.2 is roughly liquid?
No, I may have not been clear. Only 1.2% is in cash. So
percent.
98.8, I may have not been clear. 98.8% roughly at the end of February was invested, 1.2% in cash.
And that 5 billion is earning about 7.5%?
So last fiscal year, it earned 9%. The year before that, right around 13%.
So maybe you can explain this to me. I saw in the paperwork the board's returns for fiscal year 2018 were at 9.01%. But it said the returns for the calendar year 2018 were negative 4.2 net of fees.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the difference?
Sure. So the fiscal year, obviously ended on June 30th of 2018. You may recall the months of October and then December of 2018 were extremely rough on the markets, particularly in October when somewhat unusually both bonds and stocks in terms of their value dropped at the same time. They're not normally as correlated as they were in that month. What I will say is while we don't like losing money over any period, it is inevitable when you're invested. And if you look at some of the other plans that Fran alluded to earlier, CSRS lost slightly more than that, about 10 basis points more. Bucks County lost about 50 basis points more. Chester, almost 6%. Delco lost almost 7%. Montgomery County, that's often touted because, the Vanguard, 90% passively managed, they lost 5.5%. So,
what are you projecting for 19 as a return for the city?
So, I'm not in the business of prognosticating. I can't tell you what the markets are going to do, today as 3 months from now. What I can tell you is that, for the first 3 months, so the estimated numbers for the calendar year through March 31st are just under 8%. For the fiscal year, they're at around 1.6%. And for the month of March, we made about 90 basis points, just under 1%.
So the fiscal year from July 1 of 18 through, let's say, March 31 of 19, it's 1.6. 1.6.
Correct.
So unless we have a big pickup in the next 3 months, we're going to be behind.
Right. Although, again, when you look at, we have to consider that, again, we're investing, as you know, over the long term. You're going to have years where you drastically overperform, as we did 2 years ago. You're going to have years where you come in behind. The idea is to have steady, stable performance that over 10, 20, 30-year cycles gets you at or above the assumed rate of return.
Is there another question? Okay. Another question I just wanted to ask you. We're paying out right now how much per year? Like 1.1 billion, or roughly what are we paying out?
Tell you, so in the standard benefits, the annual rate of benefits, this is through February 28th, 2019, is $771.9 million that were paid out. That doesn't include drop payments and withdrawal of contributions.
Give me the total of everything that is taxed onto the pension.
That gets us into the $800 million,
$800 million.
mid-$800 million.
So in simple terms, we're paying out $800 million.
That's right.
We're contributing, and this administration and this council has been pretty aggressive in the last 4 years in raising the contribution, because it's right now like 15% of the new budget,
Right.
$746 million. So we're contributing 746, we're paying out 800. Then the interest on our investments, is that like $350 million, $375 million?
So for the last fiscal year, for fiscal year 18, the amount that we gained from investment returns was just under $464 million.
464. So that's where we're chipping away at that liability, basically.
Correct.
So what we need some of those interest payments to make up the outflow. So we're not really at our contribution is not equaling the total outflow, but the interest on the investments is helping us make up for the difference.
That's right.
Okay, well, I think you guys are doing a good job. I just want to make sure we stay on track. And also, I always like to plan for the worst and hope for the best, and I do think we will see a recession in the next few years, so just want to make sure we're on top of that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. That appears to be the end of the questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
There being none, their committee will stand in recess until Wednesday, April 3rd, 2019 at 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene in room 400 City Hall. Thank you very much.